Um, it looks like they must have moved the restream option here. Okay, well, we're just gonna go this way. All right, welcome everyone to another episode of Cannabis Marketing Live. I am your host, Jake Litke. I'm the CEO of MediaJel. Today we have Jordan Hobson from Leafbuyer. Leafbuyer is a texting and loyalty platform. Jordan, we're going to talk a lot about texting. I'd like to start off just a quick intro about yourself. And something I like to always ask is how you found yourself in the cannabis industry, because everybody has their own way that they found themselves here. And then we'll get into a little bit of semantics because we're going to be throwing around a lot of acronyms. And then we'll go from there. So, Jordan, welcome.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I appreciate you having me, Jake. I'm excited to join in today's conversation talking about text messaging and some strategies cannabis retailers can take to have effective marketing messages that get not only delivered, but seen and ultimately engaged with to drive sales. But a little background on myself. I've been in the cannabis industry since 2019 with Leafbuyer the entire time. And I've always had, frankly, a love and passion for the plant, been around it for quite some time. And frankly, when Oklahoma allowed cannabis, as far as once we passed our medical provisions, they questioned 788. It certainly, as it was coming up for vote, I had my eye on a career shift and changing into the space once there was some opportunities more prevalent, that is specifically within my area. But I jumped in full feet with both feet in and didn't look back. Frankly, it's been a phenomenal experience just working with operators in the cannabis space, helping them achieve their goals, bring more customers to the table, and really help them, drive customer interactions.
Great. All right, thank you for that. All right, so like I said, I'd like to talk about some acronyms first because there's a lot of them in this space. So let's
Sure.
maybe you can start off with kind of Fisher Price 101, the big buckets of the difference between SMS, MMS, video, the different types of messages, and then we can talk about the different types of numbers, and that'll set some groundwork so we can talk about how we do different tactics and what you're using to drive sales.
Yeah, absolutely. So those are good questions, and there are major differences when it comes to SMS and MMS when we're talking about those two types of campaigns that can be sent out. The MMS, which is going to be the multimedia messages, those will have images in the text campaign itself that's sent out. So not just maybe a click through and once they're into an interstitial page, seeing an image, but actually seeing an image on that very first text, which is important because it can do a couple of things. Because SMS, while it doesn't have any type of image and has just text, it can run into some challenges with overall delivery, and we can unpack that. So with, again, MMS, and not only is it going to have a higher engagement level, because when people see, whether it's a welcoming image saying, hey, check out your new alert, check out your new notification, or if it's a logo from a dispensary, something that is a little more inviting to them to, propel them to actually take action with the message, we see a lot better response rate from an overall participation standpoint when customers are sending an MMS. So it will help drive overall attention to the sale itself. Whereas with SMS, in cases where a message does not contain an image, when it's just being sent out, that first text, just actual notes in the body of the message, where that can cause challenges is when you think about spammers and anyone that is ever like sent a text, or if you've been on the receiving end and got something that says like, hey, this is Apple or Google, click here to change your password. Well, the unfortunate situation is, yeah, yes, those spammers exist. And if you think back to those messages, if you've ever received one, they're all sending SMS. And frankly, they do that because it is cheaper. So they don't have to pay the fees, because obviously there is a higher cost for providers sending a multimedia message out. So the unfortunate reality is SMS traffic due to spammers abusing it in such a high rate and sending out, blast messages to a million plus people looking for one or two susceptible folks to, click in. SMS traffic becomes much more scrutinized, and so the delivery rate can suffer as a result. Whereas you should, as a provider, as a merchant, you should expect your providers, your platforms to be seeing high 90 percentiles with MMS messaging. That can dip really on any system when it comes to SMS, just due to the overall filtration of SMS.
That makes sense. I get probably 5 to 10 spam SMS messages a day, mostly from
Yeah.
like lenders because I run a company and they all think that they want to loan me money. So I get all kinds of various people offering various amounts of money. Um, you mentioned delivery rate is lower on SMS because of that. And when we talk about delivery rate, there's a few different places where you can have delivery rate issues in the pipeline, right? So you've got your platform, you're going to be sending messages through some messaging systems that's going to eventually get to a carrier or, a wireless operator. And do you see filtering happening both like at what we'll call the exchange level and at the carrier level? So maybe T-Mobile versus Verizon versus, I almost said Sprint, AT&T. How does it work in that system in terms of the different carriers?
Yeah, it is all in terms of the filtration itself. It begins with the carriers. It wouldn't necessarily be through the aggregator that you're using. It's going to be when the carrier blocks a message. In the past, in years past, going 3 or 4 years back, there was a heavier move or a heavier filtration rate with specific carriers. T-Mobile being one of them in particular, that was really having a much higher filtration rate than, maybe an AT&T or some of the other providers in the space. Today, it has shifted on a more level playing field in terms of just how many messages are being blocked. And we can get into this as well when we speak to TenDLC and registration of businesses and the components that merchants have to be aware of now when it comes to text messaging. That in and of itself has really, really driven down any issues just with overall delivery, with some of the formatting changes that have been required from the carriers that merchants must now abide by, and platforms like Leafbuyer must institute. It definitely has increased the overall delivery percentages of messages. So that's something that merchants can take comfort and solace in, is knowing that their campaigns should be seeing at min 92, 97 to up to 97% in terms of overall delivery on an MMS campaign when it's properly vetted, registered, and sent out.
All right, well, let's talk about that a little bit then. I know that there are short codes, and those have been around for a long time. They were very popular back in the ringtone days, even going, back 20 years ago. So you've got short codes that looks something like 5 or 6 digits. You have 10DLC, which is an actual phone number, right?
Right.
And then you also have toll-free numbers, and those operate the same. They're different than 10DLC, or are they the same?
They do operate differently, a little differently in the sense of the landscape from a TenDLC registered number. And frankly, toll free is being phased out. Toll free numbers in general are not being utilized, just with the updated switch and the formatting with registering for TenDLC. And so that has been the major kind of the tectonic shift in the industry that has been required for all new registered companies that are looking to text, and people that have even been texting before have had to go through this registration process. And short codes are not as utilized within this space just because they're harder to come by, and frankly they're very cost prohibitive in terms of actually acquiring
Very
a short
expensive.
code itself. Yeah.
Uh, I don't know the answer. What does DLC stand for?
TenDLC is 10-digit long code.
Okay, 10-digit long
But
code. All right.
yeah, so that's what it actually, the actual term, if you will,
Actual term
means.
is perfect.
Yeah. Yes.
Um, SMS, short message service, MMS, multimedia
Yep.
service, right? Yeah. I worked at
Exactly.
Verizon a long time ago, like 20 years ago, and I was on the team, and they were rolling out inter-carrier messaging. At this point in time, like when I was at Verizon, you couldn't even send text messages between carriers. You could only send them
Hmm.
inside of one carrier. Um, and it's been interesting to watch that evolve. So,
Absolutely. It changes.
uh,
It seems like every 6 to 12 months or so, there's a new update. It's
yeah.
always evolving for sure.
Yeah, I remember one of the messages you guys at Verizon, it was New Year's, and they were all excited because they're like, we sent 1 million text messages in one day, right? That was like the big benchmark at the time. Now
Oh
they
yeah,
want to send 1 million messages a second. Um,
right.
okay, so we've got SMS, we've got MMS. You've got deliverability issues sometimes with SMS, but if you register your 10DLC, that gets rid of a lot of it. Is that true?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Now, I'm a marketer. I want to send messages to, let's just take a simple use case. You've got your own list of your own customers and you want to send them an offer, get them to come
Hmm.
into the store for, more frequently or purchase more. When and why would I use SMS versus MMS?
Yeah, good question. So really, anytime it comes to a promotional campaign, driving customers into the store for a special that you might have, maybe there's a new product launch that you have coming out. You've been working with a particular vendor that's, got a product in queue that's been gaining some buzz, and you want to get customers into the store for that. These are great reasons to send MMS. Really, anything to drive customers into the store for like a new reason, I always recommend, and we counsel stores to leverage MMS for this. SMS can come into play for like transactional receipts, like if you wanted to send a customer a note, and integrations, of course, come into play with this. You need high level integrations with the point of sale. You need to make sure that your platform is integrated from the standpoint of pulling data to trigger some of the campaigns I'll speak to now. But for SMS, again, like a transactional receipt, customer comes in, you thank them for your purchase, you trigger an automatic message that makes them feel warm and fuzzy. It maybe also tells them exactly how many points that they just earned and how many points in totality that they have with you all in terms of the system that you're running. Those are good use cases for SMS, along with birthday text messages. If you wanted to give them a quick promo for their birthday, that could be a good reason to send. SMS text message sign up messages are also good use cases for SMS. So anyone maybe that comes into your store for the first time, and if you want to give them a reward for joining your texting or loyalty campaign, those are good messages to send out with through SMS. But bear in mind, you can also, leverage MMS for these exact same use cases as well. And kind of going back to the point about engagement and participation. I mean, just as myself, we're all consumers as well, and to some extent, I'm always much more prone to interact with and want to learn more about something that's visually appealing. So, if you do throw that image in there, it can have an even greater effect. Maybe a little birthday image, or a reward point status image, or something to correlate with that automated campaign that's being sent out. But again, SMS does work well for anything automated, in the sense that you might be sending those messages at a much higher velocity. And of course, there is a price difference and disparity with all providers when it comes to MMS and SMS. So those, of course, those use cases can be led to use SMS over MMS.
Yeah, and let's talk about that in terms of price differential. I'm not going to ask you to go into specific pricing, but relative to one another, is a
Mhm.
MMS 5 times more expensive than a SMS, or what does that ratio look like?
Another good question. And that's something that you really want to clarify as a merchant. As you're vetting different companies out there in the space, you really want to understand, okay, what is that going to look like? Are there escalating fees for different types of a multimedia message? We have seen, various situations in terms of how those messages are being charged, where, it can be a sliding scale depending on how many maybe images you have in there, or how many words that are in the message. It could go from, an MMS looking at, anywhere between 3 to 4 credits. I've heard as high as, 6 to 8 credits per message, where an SMS would be one. I think most merchants will find, when working with providers, like a Leafbuyer or someone that's offering text messaging, everything's really built on credit systems. So it's, again, important to understand where that credit differentiator is with the MMS message versus the SMS for that particular supplier. In our case, it's typically about a 3-to-1, 3.5 to 1 ratio MMS to SMS.
And then, so we understand the cost differential, but we also know, is a picture worth 1,000 words? Is that hold true in the message? I know obviously a picture is going to have more engagement. You can show product, but maybe we can dovetail into a conversation about what kind of ROI your customers see when using SMS or MMS, and maybe get a little granular in terms of the different types of campaigns that people run, right? It could be win back, it could be a promo, it could be something else. I don't even know, what the other categories are.
Sure. Yeah, no, I mean, overall, it all goes back to the overall engagement, which when you're running an MMS campaign, you just are simply going to have a much higher factor at that. We typically see when customers send out an MMS message, they generally see on a day's average about a 15 to 25% lift in sales on days that they're sending a MMS versus days that they do not. And when you look at an SMS campaign, if that same kind of promotional if that promotional objective was, being sent out, you're sending a campaign to drive sales, and it's doing an SMS and you're sending it out through that channel, it's typically much lower in terms of the overall return on investment, including obviously the engagement, which leads to the ROI. And it's important to track these ratios. You want to make sure that you have a platform that's giving you great data so you can understand what not only the delivery looks like, but the overall engagement with your campaign itself, and then how many sales are being, ultimately derived from what you're sending. You need to track all of these. A lot of folks sometimes can get caught up in, just looking at, what's like the delivery rate, for example. It gets much more complex than that.
Yeah, that's similar to digital marketing, where you can look at the impressions and you can look at the clicks and then you can look at conversions. And then, sometimes we see people get hung up on CTR as a metric. And really what you want to look at is what is your ROAS? Like what kind of sales you're targeting for the investment you're making.
Exactly.
So on the list, you're going to broadcast out whatever your tactics are. That channel is only going to be as strong as your list, right? Like how many people do you have on the list? And so everyone's clear, you still can't send unsolicited text messages, right? That's not what you're supposed to do.
Nope.
And that's probably a pretty good way to get your number in trouble, right? That you're using.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So how do you help retailers or delivery services or brands build their list in the first place? Like what are some techniques that people use that are effective?
Yeah. Yeah, very good question. And this is extremely important, right? Because it's just like anything else in life. There's no silver bullet out there that's just going to automatically, attribute more sales to your store without you doing anything. And when it comes to signing customers up, this is again a major component of text messaging. So you want to have, what we always counsel our dispensaries to do is ensure that you have a multitude of avenues signing customers up, because everyone engages with phones and electronics in different ways. And so there's different avenues in which you can capture the customer. We always like to say with our system at Leafbuyer, we've designed it to where, frankly, anywhere the customer meets you, so whether that's in the physical space at the shop, maybe at an event, or somewhere else in a physical capacity, we have a way to sign them up, along with if they're connecting with you online, if they see your website, if they go to your Weed Maps page, even there's ways to garnish really every avenue that you're touching the customer to try and help them sign up. And it's also not only important to encourage as many outlets for them to sign up, so to have it available, but to make sure that your staff is communicating to the customer directly, why they should sign up and what are they getting in the process for doing so. So a few examples of that could be, having a tablet right at the check-in, or perhaps when they're making the purchase of the product. Some folks really, especially the older generation, like to just go straight to a tablet and type their information right there. And next thing they know, they're on your text list and getting loyalty points and receiving messages. Other folks might like QR codes, and you could simply scan a QR code and the customer could, sign right up from that point. And these, of course, are, highly leverageable from the standpoint of you can put them really anywhere. We've seen them all throughout the stores in most cases, to things even like on product containers, at events, different advertisements, billboards. People have put their QR codes on. A variety of different ways to engage with the customer can be done through a QR. And then all the way to the automatic integrations we somewhat touched on earlier with these campaigns that can be set up to where a new client comes into the store, for example, and then a text message could be generated immediately from them signing up in the POS. And this can be done in a compliant way as well, that we'll touch on, I'm sure, later in today's conversation, just as far as making sure that every customer that you sign up is compliantly registered, because you have to make sure that you're following guidelines in this sense as well with TCPA, and making sure that you're checking the boxes in that area.
Okay, so TCPA, do you know what that stands for?
Yes, so that would be the Telephone Consumer Protection Act. So that would go back to, I believe George Bush is who initially put that through. But basically, it deals with any business, not just dispensaries by all means. It's really any business that's that's wanting to market and send messages to a consumer. It's stating that you have to have their permission. So in order to be able to send them a campaign, you have to have some form of registration from them that states, hey, we want to get these messages from XYZ company. And if you don't have that, then you can certainly be exposed, to some challenges with signups. And there's been, cases over the years where, dispensaries have even been, sued if they don't have the right sign up language and all of that done correctly.
Yeah, there's some law firms that exist out there, right, that specifically target this kind of thing. Um,
Exactly.
is there still, what about double opt-in? Is that still a requirement, or how does that function?
So with the opt-in, in essence, you need to have some written form of verification that they're going to go ahead and, receive messages from you. So whether that's initiated through something like a QR code or done on a website, as long as they are checking the box and you have the correct information, which we can always, guide dispensaries to ensuring that they have that. As long as that is recorded, then you're supply, or you're efficient for TCPA.
So you should keep those records. If someone has checked a box somewhere, you should
Yes,
save that log
a
somewhere.
hundred percent, 100%. That's very
Okay,
important that you keep that, and that's something a system like Leafbuyer would automatically do for you.
great. Okay, so let's talk about delivery and what the carriers do and do not allow, which I know some systems are automated, so and I think it changes around a fair amount, but um, on the digital marketing side, at least, we have to deal with different restrictions in different states of what you can and cannot put in imagery, right? So like some states allow a picture of a product and other states do not
Hmm.
allow a picture of a product. Um,
Right.
but those are for digital advertising. You've got a different thing here because you've got a direct connection with the consumer. Um,
Exactly.
are you mostly just beholden to what the carriers are allowing? And if so, what is the kind of current state of the union on what you should and should not put in your photos or text?
Yeah, so now with the TenDLC formatting that's taken place, it's really opened up, the landscape for what customers are able to put in their campaigns overall. As long as they are vetted out and registered compliantly, then because everything is link gated at this point nowadays, then they can effectively put whatever they want to within the campaign. There's no restrictions on what they're able to actually promote, just knowing that their first message would have some form of a notification that's sent out, versus something that's going to be promotional related.
And so what would that notification say? Hey, you're signing up for a cannabis dispensary. Be prepared for pictures of cannabis, or is it not that specific?
It's mainly an alert notification. So something like, hey, you have an alert, check here to see what's new. It has to be somewhat vanilla in nature. It can't have any like promotional language tied to it.
Okay, that makes sense. Actually, I want to circle back to the list building for a second. Have you seen any numbers around, like when we're running digital ads and someone's doing a promo, we've kind of figured out if you're going to do like a percentage off offer, like, 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, whatever you're doing, we
Mhm.
found some thresholds where certain numbers have higher engagement. Like if you have a discount that's greater than 25 or 30%, that's going to have a lot more engagement than a discount that is 10%, for example. And then there's some things that are about using percentage versus dollars. But um,
Right.
if you're trying to get someone, you've got your tablet at the kiosk and
Mhm.
it says, join our loyalty program. Have you seen data around whether or not join our loyalty program because you will get X, Y, or Z being more effective if you are explicit in trying to explain the value of being in the loyalty program? That's kind of a vague question, but do you understand what I'm asking?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that ties into a little bit of what I was alluding to earlier with communicating from the bud tender standpoint, and of
Mhm.
course, management having a program that is very rewarding for the customers to sign up. We found the most successful operators are giving some form of a reward at sign up, whether it's a free joint, 15% off. Some folks even have gone more aggressive where they may do 15% off your initial sign up. And if you come back the second and third visit, we'll give you 20% off the second visit, 30% off the third visit. And then, it's about really ensuring that you have something that customers will want to sign up for, and then making sure that all of your staff is communicating, what's possible with the program to every customer that's coming through your door. That's one thing that I think we see merchants struggle with sometimes is just, putting a system like, text messaging and loyalty in general in place, and then really not emphasizing it enough in the field itself to where it's being discussed almost on a customer by customer basis, and really following through, not only with communicating why they should sign up, but then from a marketing standpoint, designing programs and coming up with promotions weeks, months in advance that really move the needle for your business, give customers again reasons to come back, and you can even build your purchasing efforts from some of these initiatives that you're doing through marketing. It can really drive what you're buying, how much you're purchasing, the discounts that you're getting, and it can all tie into your overall business approach.
Great. So on the data side, and I don't know if people are doing this or not, when we're looking at customer acquisition cost for digital marketing, we will include the discount in the offer against the marketing investment, right? So let's say you spent $30 to acquire a customer from a marketing
Hmm.
perspective, and then they purchased, let's just say, $100 worth of product. But the reason they did it is partially because there was a 30% off discount, right? So now you're not dealing with
Right.
$100, you're dealing with $70. You take your margin out. That customer acquisition cost, depending on what your margin is, might be net neutral or might even be slightly negative, right? But what we want to look at as a marketer is the long-term, lifetime value of that customer. How frequently
Sure.
do they come back? This is just for a new customer. We're talking about existing customers. But if we're talking about existing customers and we say, all right, we're going to get this person to sign up and we're going to give them 15% off this purchase and 15% off the next purchase. So we've lost 15% margin on both of those transactions. However, over time, we know that people that are in the loyalty program purchase, X more
Right.
frequently percentage. Um,
Exactly.
and if you look at that from a long-term perspective, you should be able to use that data to inform how much you're willing to give a discount for someone to get on that program. Do you have do your customers that are dispensaries, do you see them looking at that long-term view when they're developing their sort of, sign up protocol to try to get people to, get on their list?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean that's a big point that factors into the equation is obviously with cannabis being a very competitive space and some dispensaries having other shops very nearby their locations. It's important that they develop a program that brings the customer back. So there are many cases where at the initial life cycle of that customer, the first couple of purchases, it's not going to be, of course, the margin that they're wanting to get to. But
Mhm.
if those programs are instilled, then it brings the customer back. So they're certainly weighing that and understanding, at what point and threshold it makes sense, to really offer these type of promotions like the one I had just mentioned. And that's why, frankly, that's a good one to use because we have seen so many clients leveraging that exact setup to bring customers back to make sure it's not just a one-time visit. It kind of proves out, as far as how effective it is for merchants to be able to get a consumer on their loyalty program. Because once they're hooked in, and data shows if you've purchased from a company, up to 3 times, you're likely going to be continuing to come back if you've had a positive experience.
That's an interesting stat. So you're saying that if once a customer shops with you 3 times, their likelihood of remaining a consistent customer is much higher. Um, what kind of like ballpark numbers does that represent in terms of someone has purchased 3 times, they're twice as likely to become a long-term loyal customer? Or I don't know if you have those kind of numbers in your head or not.
Yeah, I mean it's basically in that range. If you have customers that are coming back, 3, 4 times and they're making purchases, what we've seen is the life cycle of those customers from what we can, garnish from the data when we're reading with our customers and reviewing this is these customers stick around versus someone that, might have just came once or twice for a off the cuff purchase.
Okay, great. Now, what options do I have as a marketer in terms of customizing the messages I'm sending out, right? So
Hmm.
the simple thing would be including someone's name.
Hmm.
Yeah, what are the options, at least with your platform, in terms of what can I put in terms of macros in the message itself to make it more personalized?
Yeah, customization, segmentation is obviously very important in this space when you're reaching your customers and trying to tailor a particular offering, to what might make the most sense. Of course, uh, there's a lot of application, and we always encourage our merchants to be able to reach all of their customers on a frequent basis. But when you're really trying to tout a particular new intro, or you want to reach customers that are spending a certain amount of purchases per month or per week, you have to have the capability to dial that down. And so interjecting segmented campaigns into mass blasts, as we could call them, a promotion that might just be 20% off, or if we're doing 420 was just, here recently, if we're doing a special for everyone, obviously we want to hit our whole audience. But in the trenches, so to speak, in between these large promotions or events that we might be running, it is important really to stay, in front of our highest, consuming customers, folks that are buying the most product, shopping with us most frequently. And so having the capability of dialing that information in from your point of sale, because that's really where it's all, derived from, as far as, how much they're spending, their favorite types of products, categories customers like. All of these variables can be intertwined together to really hone in the message that you're trying to send to the end user. And it's very
Right.
important.
Let's take a quick tangent on 420 since you mentioned it. Obviously, it's usually the biggest shopping day of the year. From your perspective, from the data you have, what did 420 look like for your universe of messaging and sales compared to past 420s?
Yeah, I mean, this year it was an explosion of growth just in terms of overall campaigns that were sent out, and we saw, with 420 being on a Easter Sunday this year, it was definitely the actual campaigns were sent out we started seeing a huge increase starting Wednesday all the way through Sunday, the actual day of 420. So from a volume standpoint, we certainly saw merchants really getting ahead of the ball, so to speak, in terms of getting the message out, making sure that as consumers prepare for 420, that they knew where they wanted to shop, who might be having the best deals. We saw very effective plays as well, where dispensaries were doing, basically a sale each day leading up to the big 420, and each one was different. So marketers were getting very creative this year, and the overall day of 420. The amount of messages that went out was certainly record breaking for Leafbuyer. We were on cue most of the day, just watching traffic. Unfortunately, we didn't really see any hiccups from our side, from customers getting their campaigns out, and which was nice to see as well.
Yeah, that's great. And we originally titled this about 420, and obviously 420 is behind us. We did have to reschedule this because there was some sort of, was it a legislative or a policy change? What was it that just happened recently? Maybe you could talk about that.
Yeah, I believe we're referring to some of the updates with TenDLC, some of the changes that had been implemented there. So with that particular formatting change, it definitely impacted the way that merchants can connect with their consumer, as far as, again, kind of the way the message itself is, how it's viewed, the steps that they have to take in order to actually get the content. But it is driving, like we had talked about, a much higher form of delivery for the merchants themselves when they're sending in these campaigns out. Consumers are getting them, so that's actually been a really big shift in a positive direction to ensure that what you're paying for, the messages get to the customer, and then it comes down to, again, encouraging them at the store level to engage with them, letting your bud tenders communicate to the actual customer, like, hey, not only this is the reason why you want to be a part of our texting and VIP program, you're going to get deals that are only available to folks that are on this list. We only advertise our latest product drops through these campaigns before we promote them on other avenues. So these are certainly compelling reasons that they would sign up, but then you also want to communicate what to expect. As the customer gets the text, it's important that the bud tender's communicating, hey, you'll get a notification message. All you have to do, tap a link, and then once you tap that link, it's going to populate the promotion. You'll simply tap your birth date, and then you'll see the flyer. So it's a very quick process for the customer to engage with, and it's important that they know what to expect as they're getting these campaigns.
Okay. What is BRP? You threw that out there. Is it a BRP program, or maybe I misheard you.
BRP. Yeah, I'm not sure what that
Oh,
is.
maybe I
I
must have
said that.
misheard you. My apologies. Okay, so if I understand that, the change was when a message goes out, the end consumer has to click a link now?
Yes. So the first text that the consumer would receive would be that notification message. And then once they receive that, they click a link. It opens up their browser to an interstitial page.
Hmm.
And then from that point, that's where you'd really want to vet out, again, what are the remaining steps the consumer has to do to see your content. There are some setups that require, 6-digit PIN codes that the customer has to put in, and then they also have to put in their birth date. And when there's 3 and 4 different extra steps required, it can lead the consumer away and ultimately not engaging with the content. So it's important to try and find a solution that can really drive the customer to what it is you're promoting as quickly as as possible within the regulations. And so it's important to vet that out, that you have really kind of like a tap to continue, or a one-click move forward from that initial text to where you actually then see the campaign.
And this just happened? Or just got
In
enforced?
25, yeah, in
Okay.
2025, and it's been very heavily enforced within the last month. Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the content itself.
Mhm.
Also, for those of you here in Zoom, there is a Q&A section. So if you want to ask some questions, feel free to do that, and we'll get to those as they come up. But let's talk about the actual content itself and best practices that you've seen for messaging. And if you want, I mean, do you want to handle sort of text messages and MMS messages as two separate principles, or are they intertwined in terms of like where do your customers see success in terms of like the type of imagery that they use, both the imagery itself and whatever text you might put on it? Are you even allowed to put a bunch of text on it? Like for example, in a lot of ad platforms, you're not allowed to put very much text into certain images, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to what you're wanting as a marketer, what you're trying to promote. And the best and most effective strategies we've seen is trying to keep the consumer guessing. So not having, you know, necessarily like the same thing that you're sending out every single time. It's not to say that you can't come up with a format that works, but when you're talking about specific images and things that you're putting into the actual campaign itself and the flyer that you're creating, throw in pictures of product, show, images of the brand logos, they're the hottest sellers right now, and actual, maybe events that are coming up, and create graphics around these things that, again, people want to engage with. You have to always remember to put yourself in the consumer seat, and, hey, is this something that I really want to, to entertain with? Is this something that I'm going to engage with when I send it out? So it's really important to make sure that, from a content standpoint, you're really driving action and communicating your message. And with SMS, again, although you can do that with SMS, it's limited in its capabilities, in the sense that you won't have as much interaction.
Now, this is probably obvious to you, but I'm curious as to you send someone a message. Do people try to send you messages back? What happens?
Typically, that doesn't occur very often. It can. It's not to say that it doesn't. What you'll find in most cases, though, is the providers in this space, similar to us, it's built on a one-way communication system, kind of a mass blast setup, to where, or that segmented campaigns like we were talking to earlier. It's not, most systems are not set up to have that two-way communication when you're talking about from a marketing standpoint. But the consumers, they effectively could send whatever they want. It's not being interacted with or read.
Sure. Okay. All right. So circling back to sort of personalization segmentation, within your system, would I have the ability to say, I want to send this offer to a segment that is edible shoppers and this message to people that are flower purchasers? Is that an option?
Absolutely. Yeah. With an integration that we have with all major leading POS companies, that capability is front of hand. You can certainly do that. And we like to design the system too. We always like to think of our platform as really anyone can jump into it. Anyone can go in there and set that campaign like you're describing. If you want to drill down the data, it's the UI is set up, the user interface is set up in a way that you don't have to, take a crash course, or, separate, have separate education on how to actually use it. It has all of the high capabilities and presented in a way that, anyone can nestle up to.
What about sending consumers like messages on their birthdays? Is that something that people do? Like, hey, it's your birthday, here's a special offer just for you.
You bet. Yeah, that gets into some of those automated campaigns that can be set up with our system, and many others as well, where you can, if you want to send a birthday campaign, or maybe if a customer hasn't visited in a certain period of time, win back campaigns are very good promotions to run when, a customer hasn't shopped with you in a given period of time, to have something set that says, hey, we haven't seen you in a month, come in today and get a free joint. Or it's been, you know 90 days, come in and get a, $10 top shelf eighth, something maybe more aggressive to bring them back. But yes, those type of campaigns, birthdays included, are very important to incorporate, into your overall marketing plan.
Okay, and you just mentioned automations. Obviously, birthdays would be an automation. What are some other automations that people use effectively?
Yeah, so we touched on a few of them earlier, like the sign up text, and that's definitely one that we always encourage customers to leverage. And, anytime a customer can be rewarded for signing up, that's going to typically giving them an incentive to come back, along with, the birthday campaigns, receipts, anything that transaction receipts, if you want to give them an update on the spot, how much they've earned in terms of loyalty points, that can be a really motivating factor for customers. If I'm just shopping with you and it's like, hey, I came into the shop, I just spent $60 and I got 60 points in the process. And maybe they've even designed a application, for example, something we could talk about with customers offline if they're interested. But that can also be incorporated into your overall marketing mix as custom apps to where they can then view their overall points and really be complete the marketing channel from that perspective. Because anytime you can set up automated campaigns where it's effective, again, things like haven't seen you, birthdays, maybe a anniversary text if they've signed up on a particular date and you want to send them something every 6 months for being a customer. These are effective routes that I've seen customers do.
And when you say application, you mean like an app on your phone where you've got, an icon and for the dispensary itself, and you can go and check your points.
Exactly. Yeah, full-blown iOS, Google application that would also be integrated with their tech environment from the POS standpoint to e-commerce to website, social media accounts, really driving everything within their total environment from a tech standpoint, pulling all of that into the application. And then the company can get behind their own brand, promoting, hey, this is who we are. We have, this is our company, as opposed to check us out on a Weed Maps or social media site or something that's also got your competitors, right? At the end of the day, whether it's SMS marketing, which is again extremely effective way to zero in customers on your brand, or something like your own custom app. At the end of the day, marketers really should be focused on promoting their company as opposed to maybe sending them to a third party site that can distract their consumers' attention to something else.
Yeah, that's something that we stress a lot to our marketers is having a direct line of communication with your customers and building that brand connection is going to be valuable for a number of reasons. One is, brings you closer, the consumer, to the brand, but the other is you're always paying some amount if you're going through a marketplace like Weed Maps, right? The presence
Right.
there costs money,
Yep.
depending on what your billing structure is with them. You're basically, repaying for purchases from your existing customers. We worked with a delivery service that it took them a long time, but they finally just cut, Weed Maps off entirely.
Hmm. Hmm.
And they had a dip in sales for about 4 weeks, I would say, because their customers had to figure out how to find them again, right?
Sure. Sure.
They used a combination of email and marketing to do that, but after about 4 weeks, they got themselves back to where they were before, and they weren't having to pay that we'll use the word tariff since it's popular right now on their sales, right?
You
Um,
bet.
okay, so we'll go from there to talking about what are the most common mistakes that you see people make when they get started with texting and loyalty. Um, there's got to be some things that
Oh
people
yeah.
intuitively think are a good idea, but they're not. And I'll bring up one, which is um, it seems to have settled down a little bit, but because texting is so effective, I feel like people that get a hold of a list and it's working, they just want to smash that text button all the time because it does create,
Right.
but there's definitely an amount of messaging that is too much.
Sure. No, absolutely. I mean, balance is key. And, if you are in the category, we certainly have customers, that are very high volume texters that, if I told you how much they're texting, you would drop your jaw. But I mean, at the end of the day, if you have a staff that can really put these into play, put the messages into play, that's where they become the most effective. So of course, folks that are texting at a high velocity, at a high rate, they're taking this very seriously. They're, meeting every week, multiple times per week, oftentimes, to be able to plan far in advance, what they're actually going to be facilitating through these campaigns as far as the promotions and the advertisements and the products they'll be featuring. So some of the things that I've seen, retailers struggle with the most, just in terms of leveraging a texting loyalty platform in general, is again just is basically getting into something and really not putting a lot of thought and strategy into it. Maybe just having a very basic approach, sending out a text, once a month, or, maybe just once every other week. And it's kind of the same verbiage each time. Their team and their staff isn't behind it or really even aware of what's going on. That's really where we see some of the biggest deficiencies, and where customers aren't getting the return on investment that we've seen others get, is truly where it comes down to how much you're really putting into it, just like anything else. Because if you have compelling products with promotions that people want to see, and you're providing goods to the marketplace that folks want, and you're giving them an environment to come to that they want to come back to, I mean, they are going to want to hear from you. I mean, there are studies out there that talk about over 70% of consumers, if they have trust in the business themselves and they find value in that particular organization, then they want to hear from these businesses. They'll gladly raise their hand to hear from you. So if you're checking those boxes, and again, really giving some intuitive thought into what you're promoting, the success of these campaigns can be phenomenal. I mean, I can tell you how many stories in the 6 years that I've been with Leafbuyer where, I've had operators tell me like, oh my gosh, I stopped texting, just for a couple of days, or maybe it was a few weeks. And, my customers started, not only purchasing less, but I mean, I started literally getting asked like, where's the text? Like, are you guys not doing anything new? Like, what's going on? And I'm like, oh, well, we are. You just, you need to go to our website, and people, out of sight, out of mind. But with people nowadays looking at their cell phones upwards of 100 times per day, literally, because of how many pings and notifications folks are getting these days, you need to stay in front of them, and texting is certainly combined with things like push notifications, is the most effective way to reach clients.
Yeah, so it's really an effective way to keep an active connection with your consumers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Both in terms of telling them that there's offers, but also just being, sort of manifesting some presence with
Exactly.
consumers themselves. And it sounds like, similar to digital marketing, or really all of marketing, the content itself, the messaging and the story that you're conveying, can mean the difference between success and not success.
Absolutely, 100%.
Great. What have I not asked you that you think people would want to know about, just when it comes to texting and loyalty?
So, some of the things that I would, make sure that consumer, or rather that merchants, are paying attention to with their consumers and texting is the effectiveness, is the overall, the overall return that you're receiving with texting, and making sure that the tools that you have in place are providing that data in a transparent way for you. Because, like everything else, it's trial and error. I mean, you can find out what message is hitting the best with your consumers if you're gauging this along the way. And the three most important things to concern yourself with when it comes to texting and those data points, in my opinion, are the delivery. So you need to determine, did it get to the customer? That's that 92 to 97 percentile that I mentioned earlier you should expect. What was the engagement factor? So that often translates to participation in the form of like click through, and how many people actually are viewing the message and content that you're sending out, all the way down to actual sales. So those first two have to take place, of course, before you'd actually generate sales from the text campaign or push campaign that you've sent out. But they're all important. So it's determining, okay, of the overall return on investment, we saw 17% lift today. Through that, it was a 95% delivery on the overall text, and we saw a 32% engagement rate. We had 32% of our folks clicking through, and then really building, from those data points, understanding, okay, what was working, what saw the most participation that drove to sales, rinsing and repeating what is successful. And again, keeping customers guessing at the same time is really important when you approach your strategy.
Okay, that's great. Now you mentioned messages being read. Do you actually get read receipts?
So it would be more in the form of a click through
If
receipt.
they
So
if they
it's
engage with it.
right, yeah, which gives the merchant a good sense that that consumer was engaged because like with our platform, it's a simple click and then a tap of a your birth date. You're not even inputting it or anything of that nature. So once they've tapped the link, you can rest assured they're seeing that message if they're tapping the link.
And do you generate like unique URLs for different programs or for different customers to understand like which particular thing they're engaging with? Let's say you send someone like three messages,
Hmm.
and they click on, they got three messages over 3 days, let's say, but they didn't click on any of them.
Right.
But they click
Hmm.
on the second one because that's the picture they liked or whatever. Are you able to
Right.
delineate between which message that they sent or they read?
100%. Yeah, all the way down to the individual phone number. And all
Okay.
of that data can be tracked within our system. And it's very easy to engage too. When it comes to the delivery, we're very transparent in that. You can see from a from a day to day, week to week, quarter to quarter standpoint, all the way if you'd like to, and then take that information into Excel and extrapolate it, and we can provide the analytics on a campaign by campaign and user by user basis.
Great. Well, we're running up on time here. This has been educational, informative for me. I think you've done a good job of explaining all the ins and outs because it really doesn't look like anyone has any questions. So I think we've got through a lot today. Um,
Awesome.
Jordan, how can people reach you if they want to learn more or talk or just have questions for you?
Yeah, yeah, they can check us out anytime at tech.leafbuyer.com, tech.leafbuyer.com. You can also send me an email if you'd like, jordan@leafbuyer.com. And that's just Jordan. That's how you spell my name. And then, of course, I'll follow up with phone number and contact information if anyone would like to schedule a call or really unpack what we've talked about today at a higher level. Happy to do that. And again, appreciate the opportunity to join you today, Jake. I've enjoyed the conversation and really, it's been an engaging topic.
Yeah, it's great to we try to talk about all different marketing channels. We focus specifically on mostly digital, but that's really just one part of the picture. And we always encourage people to take a holistic approach to their marketing, look at all the channels that they can use. And I
Mhm.
think most people are aware that the texting works pretty consistently. There's not a lot of question of whether or not you're going to drive more sales. It's just how effective you're going to be. And the good news is you have a lot of opportunities to iterate, right? I mean, you send a message, you see how this one works, make it so
Exactly.
make variation, see if that works better or worse, and just continue to iterate and improve.
100%.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks for your time today. As I said, it's been insightful, and this has been another episode of Cannabis Marketing Live. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Excellent. Thanks again, Jake. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Take care.